The Copts always said they descended from the pharaohs. Everyone dismissed them. DNA proved them right. The Coptic Christians of Egypt are one of the oldest Christian communities on earth. They trace their faith to the Apostle Mark and their ancestry to the pharaonic civilization that built the pyramids. Today, they number roughly 10 million people, comprising about 10% of Egypt's modern population. For centuries, the Copts maintained that the Arab conquest changed Egypt's religion, but not its people. They claimed continuity with ancient Egypt. Most scholars were skeptical. Then, geneticists tested Egyptian mummies directly. Despite making up 10% of Egypt's population, the Copts have maintained a separate identity for over 1,300 years since the Arab conquest, preserving distinct religious practices, artistic traditions, and a genetic heritage that connects them directly to the civilization of the pharaohs. Coptic art blends pharaonic traditions with Christian iconography in a style found nowhere else in the world. Art, language, genetics. Every thread of evidence points the same direction. The Anke, the ancient Egyptian symbol of life, was adopted directly into Coptic Christian iconography as the crux ansata. The pharaonic past lives inside the Christian present in every Coptic church. The question was whether the Arab conquest represented a population replacement or a cultural transformation. Did Arab settlers replace the native Egyptian population? Or did most Egyptians simply convert to Islam and adopt Arabic over the following centuries while remaining genetically the same people? Egypt has been conquered repeatedly. Greeks, Romans, Arabs, and Ottomans all ruled, but did they replace the people? But did any of those conquests actually replace the people living along the Nile? That required ancient DNA. In 2017, a landmark study extracted DNA from Egyptian mummies for the first time rigorously. The team was led by Verena Schweinman and Johannes Krause at the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History in Germany. They extracted and sequenced DNA from over 150 mummified individuals from the site of Abusir el-Melik in Middle Egypt. Previous attempts to extract mummy DNA had failed. Egypt's hot, dry climate was thought to destroy DNA entirely. The breakthrough came from sampling the petrous bone, the densest bone in the human body located behind the ear. This bone preserves DNA far better than soft tissue or other skeletal elements, even in the extreme conditions of Egyptian burial environments. The petrous bone changed everything. It preserved DNA that mummification and millennia of heat could not destroy. The mummies spanned 1,300 years. From 1400 BCE through the Roman period ending around 400 CE. This 1,300-year span captured Egypt under pharaonic rule, under Persian conquest, under Greek Ptolemaic dynasty, and under Roman administration. If any of those foreign occupations had replaced the Egyptian population, the DNA would show it clearly as a shift in the genetic data between time periods. The team recovered mitochondrial genomes from 90 individuals and nuclear DNA from 3. Enough to map them genetically. The lower success rate compared to European sites reflects the harsh preservation conditions in Egypt. Every successful extraction was a technical achievement that had been considered impossible just a decade earlier. 19 mitochondrial genomes from one site in Egypt. Before this study, the number was 0. The mitochondrial haplogroups confirmed what the nuclear DNA showed. The maternal lineages of these ancient Egyptians belonged to haplogroups common in the Near East and North Africa, and they remained stable across every historical period sampled from the New Kingdom through the Roman era. The results were remarkable. Across 1,300 years and multiple foreign conquests, the Egyptian population barely changed genetically. The ancient Egyptians from all time periods clustered together genetically. Greeks ruled for 3 centuries. Romans ruled for 4. Neither conquest significantly altered the genetic makeup of the Egyptian population. The ancient Egyptians showed strongest genetic affinity to Near Eastern and Eastern Mediterranean populations. They were genetically similar to ancient people from present-day Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey. This was consistent with Egypt's geographic position as a bridge between Africa and the Near East, with strong cultural and genetic connections to both regions throughout antiquity. Now here's the finding that validated the Coptic claim. The study compared the ancient mummies to modern Egyptians. Modern Egyptians showed more sub-Saharan African ancestry than the mummies. roughly 8% more on average. The increase in sub-Saharan African ancestry occurred primarily during the post-Roman and Islamic periods, between approximately 700 and 1400 CE. This timing corresponds to the expansion of the trans-Saharan slave trade and increased population movement along the Nile corridor during the medieval Islamic period. The Copts, who converted to Christianity before the Arab conquest, show less of this later admixture than Muslim Egyptians do. This means the Copts preserved more of the original ancient Egyptian genetic signature than the general modern Egyptian population did, precisely because their religious community was more endogamous and experienced less admixture during the medieval period, when the majority Muslim population was incorporating new genetic influences through trade, slavery, and migration. Coptic monasteries maintained tight-knit communities for 1,000 years. Intermarriage outside was discouraged by both sides. Religious endogamy preserved the ancient genetic signature. The Copts claimed descent. Their DNA confirmed it. The irony is profound. The very social isolation that marginalized the Copts within modern Egypt also preserved their genetic connection to the ancient civilization that everyone else in Egypt also claims as heritage. The study also addressed the question that had fueled decades of politically charged debate. Were the ancient Egyptians African? Ancient Egyptians carried a complex ancestry mixture. They were neither purely African nor purely Near Eastern. The ancient Egyptians from Abuser el-Malek carried predominantly Near Eastern and Levantine ancestry with a smaller North African component. Their sub-Saharan African ancestry was lower than that found in modern Egyptians today. Egypt's geography shaped its genetics. The Nile connected two worlds, but the deserts limited gene flow. An important caveat: the study sampled only one site in Middle Egypt. Southern Egypt may tell a different story. Upper Egypt, closer to Nubia and sub-Saharan Africa, likely had more African ancestry in ancient times than the Middle Egyptian site that was sampled. The Schunemann study acknowledged this limitation explicitly and called for additional sampling from sites across the entire length of Egypt. The Nubian border had deep connections to sub-Saharan populations. Kingdoms like Kush maintained close pharaonic ties. Ancient Egypt was not one thing. It was a genetic gradient from the Mediterranean to Africa along the Nile. The Coptic claim of descent from ancient Egypt is strongest for northern and central Egyptian populations where the genetic data exists. The picture for southern Egypt awaits future ancient DNA research from sites in the Aswan and Luxor regions. The genetic findings resonated deeply within the Coptic community. DNA validated an identity claim dismissed for generations. The Coptic language itself is the last surviving form of ancient Egyptian. The liturgy preserves sounds that the pharaohs spoke. When a Coptic priest chants the liturgy in Cairo today, the vowels and consonants descend directly from the language spoken in the temples of Karnak and the courts of Memphis. Language and DNA tell the same story of continuity. The Coptic language was suppressed after the conquest. By the 17th century, it survived only in liturgy. The language nearly died. The people survived, and their DNA carried the proof of who they were all along. Two independent lines of evidence: language preserved in liturgy, DNA preserved in genomes, both confirming that the Coptic community maintained a direct biological and cultural connection to ancient Egypt through 13 centuries of Arab and Ottoman rule. The Nile floodplain supported one of the densest populations in the ancient world. Conquerors were vastly outnumbered. The sheer density of the Egyptian population along the narrow Nile corridor made genetic replacement impossible for any conquering force. You cannot replace millions of farmers with thousands of soldiers. Egypt's population was always too large and too concentrated to replace. Every conqueror ruled the same people. The same soil has fed the same people for 7,000 years. The Nile made them resilient to conquest. The study also challenged a popular misconception about the Arab conquest of Egypt. The Arab armies that conquered Egypt in 641 CE were relatively small. They did not replace the native population. Historical sources estimate the Arab conquest army at roughly 12,000 to 20,000 soldiers. The native Egyptian population was several million. This ratio made mass population replacement physically impossible. The conquest was military and political. A small elite imposed new religion and language on millions. Conversion to Islam happened gradually over centuries. Economic and social incentives drove the slow transformation. Tax incentives, social advancement, and intermarriage with the ruling Arab elite drove gradual conversion over roughly 7 centuries. The people stayed. Their religion and language changed, but their genes largely did not. The Copts were the Egyptians who did not convert. They maintained both the ancient faith and ancient DNA. This does not mean Muslim Egyptians are not descendants of ancient Egypt. They overwhelmingly are. The difference between Coptic and Muslim Egyptian genetics is one of degree, not kind. Both communities are predominantly descended from the ancient Egyptian population. The Copts simply retained a slightly higher proportion of the original ancestry because their community experienced less admixture during the medieval period. Modern Egypt is a genetic palimpsest, ancient Egyptian at the base with layers from 3,000 years of conquest. The Coptic community preserved the oldest layer most faithfully, but every Egyptian carries that ancient foundation. The Schumann study opened a new era of Egyptian archaeogenomics. Additional studies have since confirmed and expanded the original findings. Future studies targeting sites in the Nile Delta, Upper Egypt, and the Nubian border region will paint a far more complete genetic portrait of ancient Egypt than the single Middle Egyptian site currently provides. Upper Egyptian sites near Luxor are expected to show more African ancestry. Egypt was a genetic gradient along the Nile. The language nearly died. The people survived, and their DNA carried the proof of who they were all along. Royal mummy DNA from the Valley of the Kings has never been sequenced with the modern contamination controls used in the Schumann study. The pharaohs themselves await their own genetic analysis using the technology that proved the Copts were right. A 2024 study confirmed genetic stability across even longer time spans than originally tested. The expanded dataset confirms that the ancient Egyptian population remained remarkably stable genetically for 3,000 years despite repeated foreign conquests. Greeks, Persians, and Romans ruled Egypt for centuries without significantly changing who the Egyptians were at the genetic level. Conquest changes culture. It rarely changes the people underneath. Mummy portraits from the Roman period resemble modern Egyptians. Visual continuity now has genetic confirmation. The Fayum portraits, painted on wooden panels placed over mummified faces during the Roman period, are widely considered the most realistic depictions of ancient Egyptians that survive. The faces show the same range of features found in modern Egyptian populations, particularly among Copts. The Copts always knew who they were. Science took 2,000 years to confirm it. For the Coptic community, the findings carry weight beyond science. They validate a contested identity: genetics, language, and religion. 3 independent pillars of evidence, all confirming the Coptic claim to direct descent from the civilization that built the pyramids, carved the temples, and ruled the Nile Valley for 3,000 years. The oldest monumental building on Earth was built by the ancestors of people worshipping in nearby churches. The pharaohs themselves still await modern DNA analysis. The technology is ready. The permission is not. Coptic textile traditions preserved weaving techniques dating back to pharaonic Egypt. The continuity runs deep. The patterns woven into Coptic textiles in the 3rd and 4th centuries CE are recognizably derived from pharaonic decorative traditions. Craft knowledge, like genetic heritage, passes through unbroken lines of transmission across centuries. Language survived in the liturgy. DNA survived in the genome. Craft survived in the hands of artisans. A revival movement is teaching Coptic language to a new generation. Some families are raising children in it. The language revival and the genetic findings are converging to strengthen Coptic identity claims in both cultural and scientific terms. A community that was told it was a relic is proving it is a living link to one of the greatest civilizations in human history. The landscape that fed the pharaohs still feeds modern Egypt. The genes still flow through millions. 13 centuries of foreign rule. A language nearly lost. And the DNA proved the Copts were right. The cross they wear descends from the Ankh. The pharaohs carried the language they pray in descends from the words carved on temple walls. And the DNA they carry descends from the people who built it all. 5,000 years of civilization, 13 centuries of foreign rule, and the descendants are still there. The Copts were right. They said they were the real Egyptians. DNA from the mummies proved it. 13 centuries of foreign rule changed the language, changed the religion, changed the rulers. But the people of the Nile remained. The Nile carried the same people for 5,000 years. Conquests came and went. The people stayed. If this story changed how you think about Egypt, subscribe. The bones always have more to reveal.